Hi everybody, this is our third video lecture on phylum Annelida. Up until this point we looked at general characteristics in our first video, and we learned that we got the very important trait of metamerization, which is going to give the animal ability to save energy and move one part of the body without moving the entire rest of the body. You can prove to yourself that annelids are segmented or metamerized in these little lines or grooves that you can see over here on this picture of an earthworm. You can see the little lines. They're actually ridges or grooves called annuli, and it's what the entire phylum is named after. In our second video, we looked at class Polychaetes, and they are known for a couple key things. First of all, they are our marine worm, so they primarily are going to be found in marine environments, and they are also going to be really good for marine food chains. That's kind of their environmental purpose. So in class 2, the one we're going to talk about now, this is going to actually be in two parts. The first part, we're just going to take a look at some general characteristics and begin some organ systems. And then the second part is going to wrap up the rest of those organ systems and talk about reproduction. All of this, these two videos in this series for Oligochaetes, is going to be getting you ready for all of the things, the structures and organs that you're going to be seeing in our earthworm dissection. So class Oligochaete, let's get started on this first slide. It is smaller than Polychaetes. Remember, the prefix poly meant many. Oligochaetes is going to have about 3,000 or so species, so significantly lower than Polychaetes. This is our class primarily of the earthworm. So the earthworm that you see in the spring that you are saving for extra credit belongs to this class. Their location is primarily terrestrial, so that's land-based organisms, and you're going to see some in fresh water as well. And then you're also going to be finding some in marine or brackish waters, but primarily these are going to be your terrestrial ones. A couple key things about living on the land. We've said this a lot when we were together in class. Land-based living is much more difficult to accomplish for organisms. Respiration is different. You're going to respire differently on land. You are going to reproduce differently on land. In our marine or freshwater organisms, they were able to use the water as a medium in order to kind of mix the egg and the sperm together. And in land-based organisms, they are not able to do that. So when we get to our second lecture on Oligochaetes, you're going to find a really unusual way that these land-based earthworms have found a way to reproduce. Setae, they are going to have significantly less setae. So another thing that Polychaetes had a lot of, besides numbers, they also had a lot of setae, which are those fine hair-like bristles on the outside of the organism. Our class Oligochaetes will have a fixed number of setae per segment. So they are going to have 4 pairs per segment. So they will have a total of 8 setae off of every segment. That's a key characteristic of Oligochaetes. So you can kind of think about it as being different than Polychaetes, because Polychaetes did not have a set number of setae, they just had a lot of them. So Oligochaetes are going to have a set number, and it will always be 4 pairs per segment. We talked about the importance of Polychaetes, so we need to talk about the importance of the earthworm. And this is really important for us on Earth, the benefits that earthworms are going to give us, and primarily a good reason why you're getting extra credit for saving them. So what the earthworms are going to do is kind of mix the soil. Soil, if you were to dig down and stick a shovel in the soil and pull up kind of a chunk of soil, there's actually different layers to that. So what earthworms are going to do by digging and burrowing, they're going to consistently, constantly, and one of the ways in which they move is they're always taking food into their mouth. Whether or not they eat that, they might not. And so what they'll do is they'll take some soil into their mouth and they will spit it out. And then they will take some more soil into their mouth and spit it out at a different place. So what they're doing is they're actually mixing the subsoil with the topsoil. And that is something that your family members, your parents might actually go and rent at a hardware store, a machine or a piece of equipment called a rototiller to kind of till the soil and mix it. Farmers have to do it all the time. Earthworms are going to do it for free. And so they are going to mix that. They are able to, by creating little pockets and kind of channels and tunnels, they're able to get and infuse air from the atmosphere into the soil as well. And they improve drainage. When we get lots and lots of heavy rain, one of the reasons why sometimes runoff is created and you get puddles is because that soil is actually jam-packed, really packed in there. So what the earthworms are going to do is by burrowing and digging, they're actually going to once again create pockets. And so when we actually have a lot of rain, the rain has somewhere to go and it can soak into those channels, into those pockets that the earthworm is going to do. So it's going to kind of chew up the soil, kind of loosen it up so that rainwater can get in there as well. Now, locations, where do we find them? In wet weather and dry weather, or overcast, cloudy weather, sunny weather, we are going to find them in different places. So conditions are going to be perfect for them to be out and about, closer to the surface when it's wet outside, when it's damp, overcast, cloudy, and when it's dry, they're underground. So on dry, hot summer days, they're going to be deeper underground because it's cooler down there and there's actually moisture down there as well. We're going to figure out really, really quick the importance of why moisture is essential for these organisms. They also, it's not on the list, but they also, like the polychaetes, are going to be a really good source of food for other organisms. So birds, you can see here in the picture, a little reptile, they're going to be really, really important for the food and diet and continuing of food chains and food webs, but this time in land-based ecosystems. So movement. I'm pretty sure we have all seen an earthworm move, and if you were getting ready to save an earthworm for your extra credit, you're going to be kind of watching them, and they kind of move in like an inchworm type of motion. The setae are going to help them. So remember, they have 4 pairs of setae per segment. So they are going to be able to burrow. They can use the setae to anchor themselves into the soil. So if there is a bird above ground trying to pull it out, they will kind of almost anchor themselves, almost like fingernails, if you will, and anchor themselves into the soil. The bird will win. What the earthworm's trying to do using the setae to anchor them is to just annoy the bird, and maybe the bird will give up. They are going to move through a movement called peristaltic movement. It is contractions of circular muscles in the anterior end are going to lengthen the body, and contractions of the longitudinal muscles are going to happen in the posterior, kind of inching the organism forward. So it's kind of stretching, if you will. So they're going to kind of reach and stretch their anterior end, and then their posterior end will catch up. And then they're going to reach with their anterior end, and then their posterior end will catch up. So they are going to use, kind of in coordination with each other, their circular and their longitudinal muscles. Let's take a quick peek at a picture of the earthworm. So once again, prove to yourself it's segmented, and you prove to yourself it's segmented through those lines or ridges called the annuli on the organism. You can see this picture right here is pointing to these little dots on the ventral surface, and that's called the setae. Probably the most characteristic structure, which we're not going to talk about today, but the most characteristic structure of oligochaetes will be the band, the thickened band called the clitellum. A lot of textbooks you'll hear it called or be compared to a saddle. If we were in class together, I would compare it to a Band-Aid. It's almost as if you kind of put a Band-Aid, so it's that kind of thick, poofy, cushioning part of the organism. And the clitellum is going to give you key information as to the directional terms of the organism. The clitellum is not equidistant. It is not right halfway through in the center of the organism. It's actually skewed closer to the anterior end, and it's further away from the posterior end, which is down here. The clitellum is also going to be most obvious on the dorsal surface and less obvious or thinner, less padded on the ventral surface. So if you follow the arrow, clitellum's closer to the anterior end and it's further away from the posterior end, and then it's thicker up at the dorsal surface and it's not as thick on the ventral surface. So this ventral surface is in a way the belly of the worm, and the worm will move on its ventral surface. We've talked about the prostomium before. The prostomium is that anterior most tip. So you see right there the prostomium, that little nub, and then right behind that, that very first kind of complete segment, that is going to be our peristomium that we talked about as well. At the prostomium, you're going to have the mouth. So the mouth will be the opening at the anterior end, and the anus, right there is the pygidium down there. The anus will be the opening at the posterior end. So what do? Their lifestyle is going to be more scavengers. So they're going to feed on decaying organic matter, leaves, vegetation, animal matter, waste products, and things like that. So in addition to providing us a lot of benefits for our soil, improving drainage, aeration, and mixing and all of that, they are also going to get rid of a lot of things on the surface of the earth that you just don't want hanging around there. So they are going to be considered scavengers. And like we said, they are going to be very important in food chains and food webs as well. This picture here is going to give you a sneak peek as to some of the organ systems that we're going to be seeing. So you have a complete digestive tract, you have a complete circulatory system. They do have a closed circulatory system. They have a full nervous system, reproductive system, and all of that we're going to eventually get to. So when the organism eats, it's a pretty simple pathway for the most part. There's a couple of key features that are a little bit different in this organism. It always starts with the mouth. So right surrounded by the peristomium, segment 1, is going to be the opening for the mouth. They are constantly eating, whether they're eating to get nutrients or they're eating to move. They have to constantly suck in, take in food, and then spit it out. So they're always bringing things into their mouth. Right behind the mouth, you are entering into the pharynx, which is muscular. Then there's the esophagus. And then there's two structures that we've never seen before in an organism called a crop and a gizzard. So if we take a look at this picture here, this kind of is a cartoony type of picture of the digestive tract. You have the mouth, so they'll suck in food into their mouth. You have a little enlargement right here, which is the muscular pharynx. And then it kind of narrows a bit, and it's almost a pathway, like just a channel, and that's the esophagus. What's going to be interesting, if we go back to this picture, what you're going to notice, if you follow this line right here, esophagus, and you follow where it is, the circulatory system, the aortic arches, or kind of the hearts, are actually going to be surrounding the esophagus, kind of caging it in a way. So I don't want you to think that this picture is what the esophagus actually looks like. The esophagus is kind of caged by those aortic arches. From the esophagus, food goes to a storage facility right here called the crop. Because they're constantly eating, they need a place to kind of like a holding tank to, in a way, hold the food because they don't want to overload and overpower the intestine. And so the crop is squishy. It is able to expand and get fuller, or if the worm, for whatever reason, just didn't eat a lot, it's able to shrink back. So the crop is going to be kind of a holding tank for the food, a waiting area for the food to clear out of the lower parts of the digestive tract. The next structure that we've never seen before is called a gizzard. It's immediately behind the crop. So the crop comes first, and then after that is the gizzard. When we do our annelid, our earthworm dissection, you're going to notice that the gizzard and the crop actually look really different. The crop is kind of gray, squishy, really kind of a movable structure, And the gizzard is going to be much firmer and it's going to be kind of pinkish in color.